Hello, I'm Suzann Kienast-Brown, and I'm a soil scientist and National GIS specialist with NRCS at the National Soil Survey Center. I'm speaking today on behalf of members of the DSM focus team listed here who've completed this investigation of two methods for predicting continuous soil properties. So like the metric system in soccer, most of the world has embraced raster soil property maps as the preferred method of representing soil spatial variability and informing solutions to the most pressing environmental issues facing society. In DSM studies, two approaches have been proposed and practiced for the prediction of continuous soil properties. These are the depth interval estimates derived from spline functions and point depth estimates. These two approaches are really referring to how the training data is conditioned before feeding it into the regression model of choice. The plot shows the depth interval on the y-axis, so 0 to 5, 5 to 15 centimeters, etc., and the property value on the x-axis. The blue line indicates the original data sampled and measured by genetic horizon. The yellow line shows how a spline function would fit a curve to the original data and then use the average property value calculated over the depth interval, say 15 to 30 centimeters, to assign one value to that depth interval for the training data. This was the first proposed and accepted method for predicting soil properties with depth. The black dots show how the point depth approach uses measured property data from the observed genetic horizon, let's say 16 to 27 centimeters, that contains the depth of interest or the midpoint of the interval at 22.5 centimeters, and assigns that measured value for the training data. This method has emerged as an alternative to the spline-based approach in DSM studies. The spline method was the first proposed approach and the shiny new thing in DSM and has been relied on heavily. However, since the point depth approach emerged as an alternative, a quantitative comparison of the two methods has not occurred and was the goal of this project. We chose the Upper Colorado River Watershed for the study area to follow recent DSM work completed in the area by our team member, Travis Nauman of the USGS. We chose 5 key soil properties to predict at 30-meter spatial resolution using a variety of covariates and the Kellogg Soil Survey Laboratory data for the training data. As previously mentioned, preparation of the training data is the step where choice of either the spline or point depth method comes into play. Each of the 5 soil properties was predicted at 6 depth intervals following established standards for continuous soil property maps. Since the point depth approach is based on the property value at a specific depth, we chose the midpoint of the standard depth intervals. So training data for the spline was generated using property values averaged over the depth intervals shown on the left, and training data for the point depth approach was generated using measured property values from sampled genetic horizons that contain the midpoint depth of each interval. Once the training data was prepared, we used quantile random forest regression for modeling, but only generated spatial predictions for surface soil organic carbon. Since our main goal was to compare model performance between the two methods, we focused largely on the tenfold cross-validation process to generate measures of accuracy and uncertainty for each property and depth for both methods. The results showed that most models had very similar accuracy measures. In this plot of R squared, we compare each method by property, with the blue boxes representing the point depth models and the yellow representing the spline models. Individual depth models are indicated by the symbols within each box and whisker. You can see how similar the results are for the two methods. We only had minor differences detected between the pH models. When we compared R² between the two methods by depth, we saw a general trend of decreasing model performance with depth. This trend is expected given there is quite a bit less training data available for the deeper horizons. We compared model uncertainty using relative prediction intervals, which indicate how well models constrain predictions within the range of the original training data. All of the models had an RPI below 1, which indicates they are constraining the predictions well, but like the other model performance measures, in general, there was very little difference between the two methods. The RPIs for soil organic carbon were lower for spline models at most depths, indicating lower average uncertainty in spline soil organic carbon predictions. Soil organic carbon is a highly skewed variable, and we think that the lower uncertainty may be due to the spline functions generalizing some of the variability in soil organic carbon when the data is averaged over depth intervals that are highly variable. This could potentially artificially lower uncertainty in model outputs. Uncertainty was highest at depth for most properties with the exception of soil organic carbon, where middle depths had similar or higher uncertainties to the deeper depths. Another aspect we explored was the effect on model performance of differences in training data sample size for each method. The spline approach will estimate a property value for each depth interval based on the curve it fits to the data, regardless of whether a property measurement was observed within that depth interval or not. This tends to inflate the training data sample size for the spline method compared to the point depth method, which only uses measured data. Sample size seems to have little impact on the variance explained, except again for soil organic carbon. Spline models at deeper depths had larger sample sizes, corresponding to higher variance explained, which makes sense based on our knowledge that fewer property measurements are available for deeper horizons, but splines will estimate a value regardless. Point depth models explained more variance at shallow depths where sample sizes were more comparable. As I mentioned previously, we only generated spatial predictions for surface organic carbon. And we found that, again, there were similar patterns across the study area between the two methods. The difference map on the far right shows that the point depth approach predicted higher values of surface organic carbon in general, with greater differences in the mountain foothills in the northeast portion of the study area. All of our results align with other studies indicating that soil organic carbon is a bit tricky because of its high variability with depth and will require more investigation to produce better models. The main takeaways from this methodology comparison are that there aren't statistically significant differences in model performance based on accuracy and uncertainty measures between methods, and that spline functions may estimate property values in the training data that don't exist because it relies on values estimated from the curve rather than the directly measured values. In conclusion, there are less assumptions made in the treatment of the training data with the point depth approach, making it a good alternative to the spline approach, which may estimate property values in the training data that don't exist. The DSM focus team will be moving forward with the point depth approach for generating nationwide soil property maps. And one last final thought. And thank you for your attention.